Thanks again, everyone, for being here. We see people from all over the world. We see Spain, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, the US. Thank you, everyone, for being here. That's wonderful. My name is Luz Karime Calle. I'm thrilled to be hosting this session today. Thank you, Laura, for being here. And before we start, and before I have the pleasure to introduce Laura to all of you, I'd like to just mention a couple of things about who we are. Everybody Loves Languages is a cutting-edge Canadian education technology company based in Toronto and dedicated to revolutionizing language learning for individuals of all ages and backgrounds. Our mission is to make language learning accessible, engaging, and effective by leveraging the power of technology and innovative teaching methodologies. Through our comprehensive suite of online language learning programs, we provide a personalized and immersive learning experience that empowers learners to master new languages effortlessly. Remember that we are continuously offering content for professional development. Continue to join our frequent webinars and blog posts, and follow us on LinkedIn and our different social media to stay in touch. So now I'm going to have the pleasure to introduce Laura McWilliams, our guest speaker today. Laura McWilliams is an academic manager for a large global ELT organization. Currently based in Egypt, she has previously worked in the United Kingdom and Europe. She's a tutor for both the Cambridge Delta and Trinity TILEC and has presented at numerous international conferences. She volunteers as coordinator of the IATEFL Young Learner and Teenager Special Interest Group to support the global YLELT community. Her classroom practice interests include extensive reading, the use of drama, a focus on 21st century skills, and diversity and inclusion. And today, Laura is going to be talking to us about a very relevant topic, dealing with differentiation. Don't despair. The word differentiation can be off-putting to teachers. Often it is perceived as increasing our workloads and complicating our lives, and we resist trying to implement it. However, as Carol Tomlinson, author of the seminal work, The Differentiated Classroom, Responding to the Needs of All Learners, says, differentiation is simply a teacher attending to the learning needs of a particular student or small groups of students, rather than teaching a class as though all individuals in it were basically alike. This session will look, first of all, at the myriad of ways our learners can be different and have different needs that schools and individual teachers should identify, and then take a practical look at some low-resource, simple strategies that we can implement in our classroom. Without further ado, let us welcome Laura McWilliams. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure, Liz. Can you let me share my screen, please? I don't have the share button at the moment.
Absolutely. Robbie, can you help us?
Okay, sure. Let me just...
I think I need to be promoted to an organizer to share. But in the meantime, can I say how lovely it is to see people from so many different countries? It's fantastic. Oh, Professor Andres, yes, I love it. Definitely. What a beautiful phrase. I'm just going to steal that at some point. Since we're a relatively small group, although maybe more people will join, if you have questions at any point while I'm talking, feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll try and keep an eye on it. But obviously, I'm going to make sure there's time for questions at the end as well. Okay, so while they're sorting out my screen sharing, I have a little task for you. I'm going to assume most of you have got paper and a pencil or a pen with you to take notes. So what I'd like you to do, if you can, is to draw a circle, just a simple little circle. Okay. Have you done that? Give me a thumbs up or let me know in the chat that you've got your circle. Just a blank circle. It doesn't have to look perfect. Okay, now I have a question for you. How do you feel right now about differentiation? And I'm going to ask you to show me by turning that circle into an emoji. So you're going to add some details to turn it into an emoji. Is it going to be a smiley face? Is it going to be a face? You're going to have little tears coming down. If anybody's brave enough to turn their camera on and show me, I'd love to see what you've done. Alternatively, why not choose that emoji from the... Oh, someone's showing me a smiley face. Oh, fantastic. I love it. Thank you very much. Well, that's a good start. Sophie's showing me hers in the chat. I think she thinks differentiation's cool. All right, that's good. Well, I'm very happy to see so many smiles, because I've asked teachers to do this before, and I don't often get a lot of smiles. So maybe you could type in the chat for me why you drew the face that you did. What was your idea behind it? Oh, Jorge's got a thinking face. That's his emoji. That's a more common one. Because it's necessary. It's a challenge, and you love them. Ah, that's very positive. Okay, great. All right. Well, I now have screen sharing ability, so let's get going. If you can tell me when you can see my PowerPoint. Hopefully you can now.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. So as you can see, I drew a circle and I drew a smiley face because I love differentiation. I think it is absolutely important. I think it's crucial. And I think actually, little secret, I think most teachers are doing it already, even if they feel scared about it. So as Liz said, we're going to look at how our learners can be different and have different needs. And hopefully at the end of this session, everyone who's here will have a better understanding of the importance of differentiation. And most of you should have learnt some new simple differentiation techniques. And hopefully some of you will feel confident to go ahead and get going with them. So let's start by thinking about difference. Now, Liz told you a little bit about me, not very much, and you can see me. So in the chat, based on everything you know about me so far, and I see some names of people I know in the chat, so no cheating, just based on what you found out about me or what you can see, could you share in the chat one way that you think you and I are different? And Liz, could you read out for me any interesting suggestions that people come up with?
Sure, I can do that.
So, you know, maybe we have different colour hair. You know that I live in Cairo, so maybe we live in different places.
Yes, so Paola Romero says different nationalities and obviously culture, but we have lots in common too. Gustavo agrees with different nationalities. Sophie Giroux says your accent, mine is Canadian. Professor Andres Villalba says you speak in a different way. Farhad says language. Elizabeth says my accent is different. Miss Angela says we learn in different ways.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know how Angela knows that yet.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But most of you have gone for things that you can see and hear straight away, based on the very little that you knew about me. So what if I share a bit more about myself? So here we go. Here's a bit more about me. Maybe you can guess what some of these pictures mean. So now that you know a bit more about me, can you think of any other ways we're different? Any more suggestions now? Things that maybe weren't obvious from just looking at me. I have to admit here that when I was making this slide, you can see the number 43 is on there, which is my age, except when I went to Google an image for the number 43, I started Googling 34 and I appeared to have forgotten the last 9 years of my life. And it was only when I was practicing with a friend, she was like, Laura, you're not 34 anymore.
Some people are saying, I don't like cricket, different ways of learning, different taste in music, different perspectives, different learning styles. I
Absolutely.
love books, personal qualities, different age, you know, places I don't know. You are a busy bee. 43, I did think it was your age, so there we are similar.
I'll
Yeah,
let you
so
into a
lot of
secret.
interesting.
The bee is actually the symbol of my hometown, Manchester. That's why the bee is on there, because that's where I come from, and the bee is the symbol for Mancunians. So, yeah, but lots of ways that aren't obvious. Lots of things about me that you'd have to learn and find out. And of course, even if you have some of these things in common with me, you don't have all of them, because nobody is exactly the same as anyone else. We're all different. Every learner who comes into our classroom brings with them their own story, their own history, their own experiences, their own preferences. So what I'd like to do is think about differences again, but perhaps think about differences that have a real impact on learning. Now, the fact that I really like cricket probably doesn't impact my learning very much unless I'm reading a text about cricket, and then I might be a bit more motivated. But there are lots of things that can have a real impact on learning that are different for every child in your class. What kind of things can you think of? Again, type them in the chat, or, you know, as we're a small group, if somebody wants to unmute and share an idea, that's absolutely fine as well. What kind of differences? I have a list of some I thought of on the next page. So if anyone gets one that I listed, you get a point. What ideas do you have?
Motivation, life quality. I'm reading some of the responses in the
Motivation,
chat.
yeah.
Likes visual support versus listening to ideas. I guess she's referring, or he's referring to learning styles, learning.
Yeah. Learning preferences, absolutely.
Preferences. Some don't like writing, ways of learning, learning spawns and paces, cultural backgrounds.
Yeah, cultural background, cultural context, very important. Absolutely. Okay, well, I have some of these on my list, but I've got quite a few more as well. Do you want to have a look? So I came up with this list, and I think there's many, many more that I didn't list as well. So on there, you'll see things like physical health. If you are tired, if you're not feeling well, that impacts your ability to learn. Your willingness to take risks, your confidence impacts your ability to learn. If you have special educational needs, that impacts your ability to learn. But there's some things on there as well, like family support. Are you able to go home to an environment that's quiet, where you have a dedicated study space, where your family are making sure that you have the time, you're not having to go and look after your baby brother, you've got the time to do your homework. Things like locus of control. If you haven't come across that phrase, locus of control refers to whether or not you believe you have control over what happens to you and your own actions. And somebody who believes in that, it has an easier ability to learn, because they believe they have their fate is in their own hands. Things like gender, we don't like to admit it, but for various reasons, it has an impact on learning. Believe it or not, birth order. You know, that there is a certain amount of evidence that older children, sort of the firstborn versus the youngest child, will learn differently. There's also what month you were born in. There's a real impact on attainment depending on at what point in the school year you were born. That tends to, the sort of the difference decreases the older you get, but certainly with younger children, the month that you were born, your prior learning, how much exposure to L2 you've got. social classes on there, because your ability to learn can be very impacted by social class. It's connected to family support, but you know, people who are coming from a more affluent background, they are more likely to have exposure, all of the books, all of the resources that they need, maybe families that can provide them with a tutor, so many things that impact learning. So I think this is probably looking a bit overwhelming. I think maybe some of us are going, oh my goodness, all of these things we have to think about. It can look and feel overwhelming. It looks like a really long list. And how do you take all of these things into account? How do you find all of these things? So I'd like you just for a moment to sort of reflect on some of these things and then perhaps share with the group. So which of these differences out of all that list are you currently aware of when it comes to your students? So which of these things do you know about your students? How did you find out about them? And how could you find out more? Or how could you be more intentional about finding out these things about your students? Would anybody like to share a strategy they use to learn about their students and to get to know them? Because really that is the building block. Until you know your learners, it's quite hard to effectively and intentionally differentiate for them.
Some teachers are sharing their answers in the chat box. Teacher Marcela says needs analysis instrument. Gustavo says really listen to them. And Andres says now I'm applying the reality pedagogy by C. Ebden. Other teachers are saying questionnaires. In the case of special needs in education, we receive an email with information from our welfare department. As teachers, we consider that preliminary info, plus we get to know them more with an interview.
Oh, it sounds like that person's working at a really good organized institution. They're very lucky. I think not everybody has an institution that provides that much information and support. Okay, so for me, when I think about how to get to know my learners, I try and have a sort of 5-step process that I want to share with you. And it starts by analysing. And as I don't know it was, but you said somebody mentioned needs analysis tools. And these are so important. Now, there's millions of them out there. And I think everybody finds something that works for them. But what I would really encourage you to do, if you are adapting or even just designing your own needs analysis tool, is to really reflect on the differences that you want to find out about. I think we often ask about motivation and the reason people are learning. We might ask them about the skills that they think they need to know about. That's great. But take the time to find out more if you can. I would say, especially with young learners, because that's my sort of area of expertise, the classic needs analysis doesn't tend to work as well, because they don't always have the awareness of their needs. So you have to try and find out in a different way. And honestly, one of my favorite things to do with a new young learner class is I have, little post-its or little cards, this sort of size, and I give them out, 5 or 6 each. And I ask them to write on the first one the TV show that they binge watched the most recently. And on the next one, the favourite thing they did in English class last year. And on the next one, the favourite thing to do at the weekend. And on the next one, the thing that they're most proud of. You can come up with all kinds of different questions. They only require 1 or 2 word answers. Usually they're not particularly linguistically challenging, so it doesn't matter the level of the class. And then they can give these in and they can choose to write their name on them or not, but it's surprising what you can learn about your class from doing this. I remember doing this once with a class of 13-year-olds, at which point I discovered that a good 2/3 of them were watching the show Riverdale, which kind of shocked me because I didn't think it was a 13-year-old appropriate show. But it was great because later in the year, when we did debates, I got them to debate whether or not 13-year-olds should be watching that show. And they got so into that argument. And I would never have chosen that had I not found out about them. So needs analysis isn't just about the English. It's finding out other things about your learners that can motivate them and draw them in. It's a great starting point. And of course, if you have tools from your school, if you have special educational needs statements, if you have notes from the teacher from the previous year, any resource that you have to find out as much about the learners early on, go for it. But once you've got the learners in the classroom, I really recommend sharing a little bit about yourself with them. Because if you want them to open up and tell you about them, you have to model that behavior. You have to show them that you're willing to share about yourself first. So I think that's quite crucial early on in the first lesson or in the first few lessons, the beginning of a term, to share an appropriate level of personal information about you and model, and then listen when they talk back to you. And listening, monitoring during any task. We all know that we have to monitor, but I also suggest listening to conversations. Take the time before the lesson starts as they're coming in to have a chat and listen to their answer. Find out about them, and it will pay dividends. And of course, we're all human. We forget things. Maybe we have, 6, 7, 8 different classes, different groups to think about. Find a reliable system to make notes. I know teachers who do this digitally. That level of technology doesn't really suit me. Honestly, the simplest thing I do is I just have, every lesson I have a little A4 piece of paper and I divide it up into squares. I write each learner's name at the top of the square, and during the lesson I make notes. They could be linguistic notes, they could be common errors or things that the person is struggling with, or it could be they've got a football match, remember to ask them about it next week. But without a sensible system of recording, you aren't going to be able to really use the information that you're finding out, because that's the final step in the process. You have to loop this information back in. When you find something out, it's no good knowing it if you don't do anything about it. So find out as much as you can early on. Role model sharing to encourage them to tell you, but then listen to what they tell you. Make sure you're making notes about it and find ways to loop that information back in, whether it's something as simple as knowing their favorite TV show and using that as a debate topic, whether it's something as simple as knowing that they've had a baby sister and asking, how's it going? Are they keeping you up at night? It doesn't really matter, but anything like that builds a relationship and helps you know and anticipate problems and ways to support them. And of course, those ways to support them are what we call differentiation. So Liz shared at the beginning my favourite quote, my favourite definition of differentiation from Carol Ann Tomlinson, who I like to call the queen of differentiation. Apologies for the very cheesy graphic there. So here's this quote again so that you can look at it properly. Differentiation is simply attending to the learning needs of a particular student or a small group of students rather than treating everyone the same. And I want to draw your attention to one word, which is the word simply. If you take nothing else away from today's session, it's that differentiation can be simple. It's not an advanced science. It's not PhD worthy. And actually, I think most of us are differentiating most of the time. We can just get better at it. We can just be more aware of what we're doing. As teachers, we do it all the time. When you decide which student you're going to call on to answer a particular question, when you decide, actually, I'm going to give them 2 more minutes. When you're monitoring the room and you notice one child is struggling with a task, so you go and you provide them a little bit of extra support. That is all differentiation in action, and you're doing it instinctively, I think. what I would hope you'll get out of today's session is just being a bit more aware of those choices, and a little bit more conscious of them, so that you're a little bit more principled in the choices you make. So differentiation, I'm going to try and show you a little spectrum. And at one end, we've got treating everyone in the class the same, and that is definitely not differentiation. And then at the other end, we've got a class or a lesson that is 100% personalised to every single learner. And that is pure differentiation. That would probably also drive most of us insane. Okay, so what I would say is that with differentiation, we do have to try and achieve some kind of balance, because if we're 100% personalising everything, but we are a burnt out teacher, that is not going to help anybody in the long run. What you're aiming to find is some kind of sweet spot, where we're, moving towards the personalised end of the scale, but we haven't got up to the burnt out point on the scale either. But what I would say is, if our learners are all different, so are we. So where the sweet spot is on this graph is going to depend on you. Your sweet spot is not the same as mine. I'm a relatively experienced teacher. I've thought about differentiation a lot. I've used it a lot. So I can differentiate to, I hope, quite a strong extent without getting too stressed and panicky. But perhaps you aren't quite there yet. So perhaps as far as you can go isn't as far along the spectrum, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's where you are now in your journey. And of course, if you're a newly qualified teacher or somebody who hasn't been teaching very long, your sweet spot's going to be up there. And even then, that's more stressful for you. But that's fine. You haven't had the experience yet. You're not as far along your journey. So the learners are different, and so are we. But we've got to find a point where we are going in the right direction. We're going along without going too far up. And it's okay. Wherever you are now is absolutely fine. But we're just going to try and move along a little bit. So Caroline Tomlinson talked about differentiation, and she came up with 4 sub areas where you can differentiate. And she called them content, process, product, and environment. The easiest way to think about this, I would say, is content is the curriculum to some extent. What the teacher wants you to learn, what the students are supposed to learn. Process is how they learn it, or how you teach it, perhaps. Product is how the students demonstrate what they have learned. And environment is something that perhaps as teachers we don't have as much control over, but environment could cover things like things like seating, displays, groupings. It could also cover things like routines, where we would have a little bit more control. But by and large, environment isn't really something teachers can control. That's more done at the school level. So what I would like to focus on today is content, process, and product. So I'm going to show you a few different activities in each of those 3 categories. Let's see what you think. So content. So remember, content is curriculum. Content is what we're hoping the learners will learn. Maybe it's even our aims. So I think this is the one that most teachers think of instinctively when they think of differentiation. It's kind of the first one that comes to mind. And usually it's the most labor intensive. So ways of adapting by content would be perhaps adapting the level of texts that you're working with. So, having sort of 3 different versions of the same text written at slightly different language levels. That's something that's a lot easier to do nowadays than it used to be, because there are online tools and AI tools that will adapt our texts for us. I don't know if any of you have experimented with this with ChatGPT yet. I think it's impossible to do a training session in the last few months without mentioning it, but it is something that is a lot quicker and easier than it used to be. having success criteria, multiple success criteria, and acknowledging that our learners may not achieve all of them. That's a way of adapting by content. It's understanding that not all our learners will get to the same point. Not all our learners can get to the same point on the same day. Quite often, if you want to adapt by content, you might use Bloom's taxonomy. Is everyone familiar with Bloom's taxonomy? So that would be pitching content at different levels using different thinking skills for different learners. Something else I love to do when I'm adapting by content is assigning project roles. By assigning project roles, I'm anticipating that different learners will progress further in different skills. So if you're doing a sort of a Dragon's Den style project where learners have to come up with an invention and pitch it, you know, if someone's the marketing person, they're going to work on persuasive language. If somebody's the finance person, they're going to work on sort of statistical language. They're all going to learn slightly different skills, slightly different lexical sets, but that's okay. Now, process is probably, I think, a very discrete way to differentiate. Because if you differentiate by process, remember, process is how the students are learning what they're learning. Very often, it's about providing options, and the learners don't always notice that other people are learning differently. So scaffolding and the provision of scaffolding, for me, is a key way of differentiating by process. And we're going to look at scaffolding a little bit more in a moment because I think it's very important. But the great thing about scaffolding is if you don't need it, you don't use it. So it's there for everyone, but only the students who need it will notice it or will be drawn to it. So it doesn't stigmatize a learner who needs the support. It's not obvious. Process differentiation could include grouping, making sure that you're putting groups of similar ability or similar readiness to learn together, so that they're working at the same level. Thinking about your instructions and the level of instructions that you give, perhaps providing visual support for those instructions, chunking those instructions. Some learners didn't need the chunking, but it didn't matter. Again, it's a way of providing support for those who need it without making it obvious who those are. And then by activity type, if you want to organize by activity type, for instance, if you're teaching vocab, you could have one group matching definitions and vocabulary items. You have another group doing the same thing, but they have visuals instead of written definitions. And you have another group who are looking at a text and inferring from context. You could also have another example, if you want to do some comprehension work, you can have one group watching a video and another group reading a text on the same topic. So they're getting the same content, they're getting the same information in the same language, but the input method is different. One's learning by listening and watching, and one's learning by reading. They're still getting to the same place. Process is about how you support them getting to the same place. Content is admitting that they might get to different places. Does that help explain the two? And then the last one, which I think is conceptually scary for teachers, is differentiating by product. This is sometimes also known as differentiating by outcome. So differentiating by outcome could include giving your learners a choice of outcome. Do they want to demonstrate what they've learned by giving a presentation? Or do they want to write an essay? Or do they want to make a video? What do they want to show you? Or how do they want to show you what they've learned? And giving over that kind of level of choice to a class can be scary for a teacher. I think most teachers are secret control freaks, right? Would you agree with me on that one? We like to know what's going on in the classroom. We like to see what everyone's doing, and it can be very hard to let go of that. But it's incredibly empowering for the learners. It allows them to respond to their needs, to show off in a way that they can, you know, to perhaps bring their skills that they have from outside the classroom. I'd include their choice of assessment, so choice of outcome, but also choice of assessment. Do they want to test? Do they want to make a portfolio? It's a big step, and that can be more work for the teacher. So we're not going to look at these things too much today, because I did promise simple and easy. We will look at time-bound tasks in a moment. A time-bound task, in a time-bound task, the amount of product is what changes. And we will also look at fast finisher activities, because fast finishers, in my opinion, are one of the most disruptive things in the classroom. Okay, are you comfortable with these 3 different types? Do they make sense, or does anyone have any questions at the minute before we move on?
There are no questions.
No?
In the
Okay.
chat here.
So either I've explained it really well, or I've explained it really badly, and everyone is so confused they don't even know what to ask. Let's hope it's the former. All right, so let's have a look at, I'm going to look at one item from each of these categories in a little bit more detail. So I've chosen success criteria because I think they have many, many benefits in the classroom. But if we're talking about differentiation, I do have some top tips. This is the chili challenge way of doing success criteria. It's an idea I stole from a friend. It's not my original idea. And it doesn't have to be chilies. You can adapt it to whatever you like. But the concept is, when you're creating the success criteria, you give the learners a choice of how far they want to push themselves. So you would assign a chili level to different types of success criteria. So for one chili, you have to include 3 different adjectives. For 2 chilies, because it's spicier, you know, you get the little chili symbols on menus in places like Nando's and restaurants that sell spicy food to show you how spicy it is. So for 2 chilies, you have to include 3 adjectives and 3 adverbs. Or for 3 chilies, you have to include 3 adjectives, 3 adverbs, and a modifier, something like that. So it's giving students a choice of how far they want to push themselves, allowing them to differentiate for themselves. But at the same time, you are kind of scaffolding their understanding of, you know, what success looks like at different levels. Something else I would say with success criteria, another tip, is closing the loop. If you've done a project that has success criteria and they looked at that at the end and they rated themselves and you rated them and they got feedback, bring that forward into your next project. Say, okay, in the last project, you know, you had a criteria, the success criteria that you wanted to work on time management, and, you know, you were only kind of halfway along where you wanted to be. Bring that forward. Bring that success criteria into the next project as well, and let them keep working on it. Because otherwise, if you just move on to something that's a new success criteria, it's completely different, they're never going to be able to see progress or feel progress. Maybe you noticed that when I did the session aims for today, I said, some of you will do this, most of you will do that, and all of you will do the other. So when you're setting criteria, using something like some, most, and all helps your learners understand that it's okay if they go different lengths along the journey. They're not always going to end up at the same point. It's really, really important that learners understand themselves that they are different and that that's okay. And showing them through something like some, most, all can be really valuable. I think allowing them to write their own success criteria is absolutely crucial. Of course, you're going to look at, you know, your project, you're going to talk to them, okay, what does a successful poster, if that's what you're making, look like? What goes into it? And most of your success criteria will be the same for everybody, because, you know, a successful poster looks a certain way, has certain things involved. but allowing them to add their own, something that they want to work on, personalized target, is really, really valuable. And I also think with success criteria, encouraging them to include some that focus on the process, not just the final product, are really great, because our learners have different skills. Our learners have different abilities, knowledge. And so when we just focus on the final task, the output, the poster, and sometimes we have this habit of just focusing on the language as well, we're not recognizing those abilities, those specialisms. And so if we make sure that we focus on how they helped the team, how they did the research, all of those other aspects that go into tasks, we're rewarding those things, and that has a very beneficial loop on confidence and motivation and readiness to learn. Now, the great thing about this is none of this requires any real extra work from you. You don't have to prepare handouts. You don't have to do really anything different in the classroom. For me, this is zero prep, maybe a little bit of thinking, but no actual prep. And yet it will have a real fundamental, deep impact on how your learners feel recognized, seen, and how they're able to develop individually. So for me, this is a very quick win, thinking about how you can use success criteria to differentiate. If I were to move to differentiating by process, I said I'd talk a little bit more about scaffolding, and I definitely, again, have some top tips. The use of process language, providing process language. Learners who didn't need it, who already knew it, they will ignore it, but providing that support for learners who are struggling, aren't quite as confident, don't have the fluency, will again empower them to be able to complete a task that perhaps they couldn't have before. I would also say a really simple way that you can provide sort of discrete scaffolding with a reading text, for example, is a little glossary at the bottom. You can even sort of fold that under if you want to, but you can give that to everyone in the class and they only use it if they need it. This is the great thing about scaffolding. It's very, very universal and people take what they need. So it's not about creating lots and lots of different things for everybody. You give everybody the scaffolding and those who need it use it. Instruction icons. You know, this is great for instance, your ADHD students, that kind of thing. Using a clear system of little key icons to go with instructions as a visual support. They're there for everybody. Some kids won't even notice them. Some adult students won't even notice them. But the ones who need them will find it helpful to keep them on track, to keep them focused, to remind them of what they're doing. Wall displays of useful language or language mats on the desk with key vocabulary. You know, we have these in our classrooms most of the time, but being intentional about what we put in these displays, what our learners really need. They're a great place to put process language, for example. Techniques, teaching our learners techniques like the 4 Bs. So this is brain, book, buddy, boss. I don't know if you've heard this one before, but this is a great thing to teach your students. So if they need help, if they're struggling, first of all, brain, can they think of the answer? Okay, that's fine. If they can't, let them use the book. They have it there if they need it. If they can't find the answer in the book, they can ask their buddy, they can ask their table partner. And finally, they can ask the boss. I don't normally like calling teachers the boss, but we need a word that starts with B, so we go with it. It's showing them that that is there if they need it. And some learners will use the first B and then they've got the answer. Some learners will need to go to the second B before they get the answer. It's having that there and ready. And then an example from the output or product category, I mentioned time-bound tasks, and there are so many tasks that we do in the classroom that can be time-bound. Running dictations, classic EFL activity. I always say, if you're doing a running dictation, have a text that is way longer than you need and set a time limit, because there is nothing worse than having one group who've managed to complete it, they've got it all written down, and having the other groups still running backwards and forwards, trying to get to the end of a text. Usually with running dictations, it's not about having the whole text. It's about getting the text accurate. So making it time-bound makes it a lot simpler. Free writing, very often we give word limits, that's great, but every now and then think about giving a time limit instead. Flashcard games that can be played as many times in a set period of time are fantastic, because learners will, they can do a palinism and they can shuffle and do it again and again. And if it takes one group a long time and another pair can play it twice in the same time, it doesn't matter. The A to Z game, the vocabulary game, where they have to come up with as many words related to a category for each letter of the alphabet as they can. Don't give points for quantity. Give points for accuracy. They don't need to know what other people got. Give them 5 minutes to list as many as they can. And if somebody gets one for every letter, great. If somebody gets only 20 letters, fantastic. Somebody only gets 10. It's their producing what they can produce and us accepting that. Another activity I love to do, because they don't know that they've answered more questions than another, is a question race. So I will have texts around the room, 4 or 5 different texts on a topic, and I'll have the comprehension questions in a pile on my desk. And they'll work in groups, perhaps, and they'll come up to me, get a question. They have to find the answer. Once they come back and tell me the answer, if it's correct, they get a different question. And so everybody's sort of working at different paces, and nobody really knows how many questions there are in the pile, because you just keep handing out the next one. And it's great because you call an end. Okay, great, you got all your questions, well done. It's not about how many they answered, because they have to give you the right answer to get the next question. It's all about accuracy in the time. So any way that you can make an activity time-bound is natural differentiation. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about today, because I am conscious of time, is this. Have you heard children in your class say this, or even adult students in your classes say any of these? How does it make you feel when you get students shouting these things out? Is this a familiar scenario?
Very familiar, yes.
Absolutely. This is the kind of thing that you will hear from something that is classically called fast finishers. Now, fast finishers and people shouting these kind of things have a really negative impact on the classroom, because the kid who hasn't finished, or the student who hasn't finished, is going to feel, oh my goodness, why haven't I finished? They finished. I'm not good enough. I didn't know the answers. They're going to feel inferior. Their confidence is going to get knocked. And while your attention is going to the child who's shouting out that they finished, the one who hasn't finished, the one who's actually struggling and probably needs your help, isn't getting your attention. Now, of course, the child who is finishing fast, well, maybe they're doing it because they want to get to the fun activity. Maybe they haven't checked their work. Maybe they haven't actually done their best. If you don't go and respond to the fact that they're shouting out, they're going to get bored. They're going to become a distraction. And then there's the impact on you when all of these people are shouting for your attention and you're trying to juggle everything. That's stressful. And I know that certainly when I started out teaching and I was anticipating this, I was planning millions of different activities just so that this wouldn't happen. And I didn't use half of them, and it was completely wasted. And yeah, it's very, very negative. And differentiation is definitely one of the ways we can resolve this scenario. Now, first, we do need to think, what do we mean by a term fast finisher? Because I think there's 2 different types. There's the fake fast finisher, the one who hasn't really actually finished, but is telling you that they have. And maybe they didn't understand what the task was. Maybe they didn't want to do it and they're just saying they've finished so they can move on and do something more fun. But they're definitely, maybe they think that finishing fast is a good thing. Maybe, they've been rewarded for being quick in the past. But they're definitely a classroom issue. Even though they're not real fast finishers, they're still a problem. And then you've got the real deal fast finishers, the ones who really have finished. Now, it's important to remember that they are not necessarily smarter or better, because those are very general terms. What they are is quicker, possibly stronger at this particular task, this particular skill. We can't take the fact they're a fast finisher and give it a qualitative judgment on them as a learner. And, you know, where that strength or quickness comes from, it could be that they've already studied it. It could be that they've, you know, been supported in some other way. Remember all of those things that we said earlier that contribute to ability to learn. But they've really finished. They've done something well. They still deserve to be challenged. So I think from this, we can kind of come up with some criteria to think what is a good task for these people who have finished. And I would say prevention is better than cure. If you can prevent this happening, we absolutely should. And this is why those previous differentiation ideas are important, thinking about putting the right people together. I think we also have to talk to our learners about what finished really means. So that's where success criteria are coming in, so they know what they're aiming for. And of course, time-bound activities, you're not going to get this problem because everybody is, by definition, finishing at the same time. But we can't always do all of these things. We're always going to get this finished teacher happening sometimes. So we want to try and eliminate the negative behaviours, the shouting out, the very physical, obvious signs, because we said, you know, negative impact on the other learners. Now, they could be doing these things because they want you to check their work, or they could be doing them because they want to know what to do next. If it's about checking their work, there are techniques that you can use with visual signals. You can get them to put up a red flag. You can get them to just do a specific action. If they want to know what to do next, I think then what you need is to set up a routine so that they don't actually have to ask you. They know what to do next if they finished. So I'm going to suggest a couple of activities. Here's a lot of activities. We're going to look at a couple of them in a bit more detail. If you want to make a note of any of these and ask me about them, if there's one you don't know or don't recognise, you can ask me at the end as well. But I'm going to talk a little bit about some activities now. I think that, as I said, it needs to be a routine, and there are certain things that I would recommend when you're designing these activities. You need to keep them simple. Designing a fast finisher activity should not be more work than planning the rest of the lesson. I also recommend making them quite broad, having activities that are applicable to lots of different lessons, that don't only work if they've just done this one previous activity, because again, that's just more work for teachers. Keeping it simple, keeping it broad means that they're reusable again and again, and so it's less work for you. And I also say you have to keep them bonus, by which I mean they have to be things that still benefit the learners. Those learners who have finished quickly, the genuine fast finishers, they deserve to be challenged and extended. Now, you might have to be spending your time supporting the learners who haven't finished, who are struggling. They deserve your time and attention, but the fast finishers still deserve to be challenged, to extend and develop. So simple, broad, and make it a bonus. And remember that setting this up as a routine is going to take time. You're going to have to keep plugging away at it before your learners know and stop calling you for attention, but you can get there. So a couple of things to look at. The classic fast finisher activities I see a lot, and I say use with caution, are, okay, you finished, great. Can you show your classmate what to do? Can you help your colleague? I think this is a use with caution, because I don't necessarily think this is always very beneficial for the learner who's finished. And I think there's a danger as well for the learner who hasn't finished, that you're reinforcing their feelings of failure. I needed help. My colleague, my classmate had to come and help me because they're better than me. And I think another thing that I often say is, okay, just write 2 more sentences. And again, that's more of the same. It's not extending, it's not developing, it's not really necessarily recycling or pushing that person onwards. So instead, a couple of simple ideas. This is something I love to do because it's very easy to make into a routine. It doesn't have to be a word search, it can be, some other activity, but I love to make it a huge A3, even bigger word search on the wall around the topic that we're doing in class. And you can use this cooperatively. So the whole class are working on the same word search. And, when they found all of the words in it, there's a reward. Or you can make it competitive if you have a classroom management system that's already grouped. Each one of them has a different colour, and when they've finished the word search, that they can use, you know, okay, the team that we're using, the red pen, found the most words, they get the reward. You can do it either way, depending on the classroom dynamics. It's great because it can be connected to a current topic or theme, but it's still quite broad. It's not very specific to a task. So you can, if you make it big enough, you can use it for multiple lessons. It's a chance to review. It's a chance to extend, depending on the words you put in. It's an easy exit point, by which I mean that, you know, sometimes if you give a fast finisher task and then the student gets really into it, they don't want to stop doing it when everyone else has finished the original task. Whereas a word search, it's very easy. Okay, I found a word. Now come back and join the group. We're all going to move on to the next task. It can last several lessons. It can last a whole topic. It's not that complicated to do. There's word search generators online, or you can even just Google and download a pre-existing word search. Once you've made it, it's done. It's really easy to give feedback on, did they get the right words? And it's silent. It doesn't really distract from what's going on in class. So, you know, having this on the wall so children know if they finish, they get to go and start doing the word search. They don't have to talk. They don't have to ask for instructions. It's not disruptive. And it does allow the wriggle bums to get up and move, which sometimes can be really important. Simple, materials light, but it's solving a problem. Another example would be something like a choice board, which really does allow for differentiation. Again, lots of chances to review or extend. It's promoting learner choice and voice, letting them do something that they're attracted to. Super easy to adapt for level or age. You just have different choices. Again, lasts for as many lessons as you like. If you want to focus on specific skills, you can take a bit more time to prepare and make, though. That is definitely the downside. And learners might need support for some options if they actually choose something that's too difficult for them. But lots and lots of opportunities to differentiate with this one, and very, very empowering. And again, super easy to set up as a routine. If they finish, they go, they take a choice, they can work on it. An extension of that is something like a fast finishers folder with lots of different activities again. Lots of different activities in it. Again, lots of chances to review and extend. It's labour intensive to create. Learners might need some support for options, but again, lots and lots of choice for the learners. These are very, very simple things. There's lots of other different activities that you can do for fast finishers, but if you're starting out with differentiation, I would start with fast finishers, because I think that they have a very immediately negative impact on the classroom, and coming up with a routine to solve that problem is going to give you time and space and mental energy to then start thinking about differentiating in your main activities. So I see that I'm almost out of time. We're already differentiating all the time. Just being a little bit more intentional about it, thinking about the different options we have can really maximize the benefits, because we are all different. And I think that's something to be grateful for. But differentiating doesn't have to be more work. It can be materials light, it can be simple. It is something that we can all do. And the reason we need to do it is because everybody is different. I'm sure many of you have seen this image before, but I think it's a great one to finish on, to remember how important differentiation is. And if you think back to the session aims, I said at the end of this session, all of you will hopefully have a better understanding of the importance of differentiation, and that most of you might have picked up a new differentiation technique. And hopefully some of you will feel confident to implement new ideas straight away. So I wonder, are you one of the all, one of the most, or one of the some? If you could write in the chat all, most, or some, and let me know where you think you are, I'd love to see that. And I'm just going to finish by sharing with you my contact details if any of you want to reach out to me in the future to carry on this conversation. You've got my email address and my LinkedIn on there, and the QR code will take you to the social media for the ITEFL Young Learner and Teenagers SIG, the Facebook, the LinkedIn, the Twitter, all of those things where we share resources on differentiation. And anything to do with teaching on a regular basis. And now hopefully there's a little bit of time left for questions.
Laura,
a little bit.
Thank you so much. That was a brilliant, amazing presentation. Thank you very, very much. And yes, we have a couple of questions from the chat. I think most of them were answered as you were expanding on the notions of differentiation, but I'm just going to read them out loud in case you want to emphasize or reinforce any of the ideas that you shared. So we have a question that goes, how can we infuse differentiation into our classrooms when they are overpopulated, when teachers have very large classes? We
That's
also
definitely a challenge, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I think, okay, everybody's different and we are trying to work towards everybody getting what they need. However, as I said, it's a spectrum, and grouping, I think, is the way forward. Really, with the bigger the class, the more you have to think about the groupings, because that allows for them to do so much peer support. So yeah, planning groupings, thinking about groupings for me is key to making differentiation work with big groups. You're not going to get as far along the spectrum. It's just not possible, and that's okay, but you can get towards it.
Definitely. A very related question, how to handle students when you have different levels and ages. I think you provided us with a lot of ideas on how to do that and concrete strategies. We also were wondering if you could expand on the issue of assessment that was touched upon when you were describing the product differentiation. So maybe some ideas on assessment and differentiated assessment in the classroom.
I kind of feel like that's a whole webinar in itself.
Yes, totally.
But I think I think differentiated assessment is really about making sure you're assessing the student. Sometimes we always have to assess against set criteria. We're preparing students for IELTS, we're preparing students for a state exam. There are going to be limitations, but we don't always have to do that. So I think whenever there's a chance to assess in a more student-centered way, we should be embracing it. And for me, that's very much about assessing the student against themselves. So it's not how did you do, how many out of 40 did you get? It's did you get more than last time? Was it easier than last time? Was it less stressful than last time? Could you talk for 15 seconds longer than you could last time? And that for me is a really, really important thing to do whenever we have that chance. And I fully acknowledge we don't always, then we have to prepare them for state assessments or, mandatory assessments. I know that, but we don't always have to do it. There are opportunities to build in and help students understand their own progress as well.
Definitely. Well, I think, hello, some people are joining us now. I'm sorry to tell them that our webinar is coming to an end. We really appreciate everybody for taking the time to join us today. Laura, thank you so much for this insightful presentation, and we really hope we can expand these conversations further with your contact, email, and through the resources in IATEFL. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.
And thank you again for the invitation to come and talk about teaching, because it definitely is my favorite thing to do. And I am going to take the time to read everybody's comments. But yes, please do reach out to me. I see somebody's asking about the material. If people want copies of the presentation, just let me know and I can email that as well.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Have a lovely afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.